The village lay nestled in a fertile valley, surrounded by rolling hills and terraced vineyards that gleamed under the sun. Every year, the villagers celebrated the bounty of their lands with grand feasts, festivals, and the rich aroma of wine fermenting in countless barrels. From early morning until twilight, the village hummed with activity, farmers tending the grapes, artisans crafting decorations, and cooks preparing lavish spreads that would later be presented to the ruling elite. On the surface, it seemed like a place of prosperity and abundance, where life was full and vibrant. Yet beneath this facade, a tense and unspoken hierarchy kept everyone in careful obedience. The ruling class, a small group of nobles and landholders, maintained their grip through intimidation, wealth, and subtle violence. Their pleasure was paramount, and any hint of defiance, laziness, or disrespect from the villagers was met with swift punishment. The festivals and feasts, celebrated ostensibly as joyous occasions, were as much about demonstrating control as they were about joy and gratitude for the harvest. The villagers, though skilled, diligent, and hardworking, learned to hide fear behind polite smiles, nods, and murmured words of praise, never daring to challenge the elite directly. The heroine of this story, a young woman in her early 20s, moved quietly through the vineyards each morning, her hands skilled at plucking the ripest grapes with care. She was clever, resourceful, and keenly observant, qualities that set her apart from others in the village. While many villagers kept their heads down, she noticed small details: a merchant's furtive glance, a noble's subtle sneer, the way shadows fell differently over certain doorways at different times of day. Her intuition, already sharp, seemed almost preternatural to those who occasionally caught glimpses of her in moments of deep thought. Whispers traveled quietly through the village. Some called her the watchful one, others hinted she could foresee injustices before they occurred. Whether these whispers stemmed from superstition or genuine observation, they gave the villagers a mix of awe and quiet hope, though none dared speak such things aloud near the nobles. At the heart of the village, the great manor rose like a sentinel over the fields, its tall windows reflecting sunlight off polished stone. From this vantage, the elite watched the villagers as much as the villagers watched them. The nobles demanded perfection in all tasks associated with the feasts. The grapes must be harvested at the perfect time, the wine carefully pressed, the tables arranged in symmetry, the foods prepared exactly according to tradition. Any imperfection, any hint of error or disrespect, could invite harsh reprimand, public humiliation, fines, or worse. Despite this constant pressure, the heroine navigated her duties with a careful balance of efficiency, intelligence, and subtle grace. She moved among the other workers quietly, offering guidance or adjusting details that might otherwise attract the elite's ire, earning the cautious admiration of her peers. Yet even in her skilled and careful labor, the heroine carried herself with a quiet strength that could not be fully hidden. She possessed a sharp mind, capable of understanding the complexities of the nobles' desires and predicting their next moves and subtle interactions. Her cleverness extended beyond mere survival. It informed her ability to interpret signs and omens within the village. An overheard conversation, a sudden shift in the wind, or a servant's fearful glance might alert her to impending danger or opportunity. Those who had observed her closely noted that she seemed to anticipate trouble before it arrived, avoiding the scrutiny of the ruling elite and protecting those around her. Her connection to the vineyards and the earth itself seemed almost spiritual at times. She knew the rhythm of the land, the ripening of grapes, and even the moods of animals, reading subtle cues invisible to others. The villagers, while often fearful, could not help noticing the quiet aura of confidence and wisdom that surrounded her. Mothers whispered her name to their children when warning them to act carefully or to respect the land. Farmers shared nods with her as they passed in the fields, silently acknowledging her awareness of what others might overlook. Even in the face of the ruling elite's dominance, she exuded a sense of calm foresight, as if she had already calculated the consequences of every potential action and prepared a way forward. These qualities made some uneasy, particularly those who relied on fear and control to maintain their positions of authority. Rumors circulated that she could sense injustice before it occurred, that she possessed an uncanny intuition that bordered on the supernatural. While the nobles dismissed such ideas as fanciful, villagers quietly nurtured a growing hope that someone among them had the ability to protect or guide them through times of cruelty. The heroine's keen observations extended beyond the vineyards to the manor and feast preparations. She noticed when a noble's temper was rising, when a servant attempted to conceal a misstep, and when a tension between two influential families threatened to erupt. She learned to navigate these dynamics with subtlety and intelligence, ensuring that she could complete her tasks without drawing dangerous attention while still preparing for eventual opportunities to act. Every step, every glance, and every gesture carried weight, both for her safety and for the subtle protection she offered to others. Even as she worked, whispers of her insight and subtle power circulated through the village. Some villagers spoke in hushed tones of her ability to foresee harm, others claimed she could read the land and know what was about to happen. While no proof existed, these murmurs added to her growing reputation as someone extraordinary, someone not merely clever, but in tune with forces beyond ordinary understanding. This reputation, though quiet, planted seeds of respect, admiration, and hope among those who lived under constant pressure. They began to imagine, however faintly, that injustice was not inevitable, that someone could outwit cruelty and perhaps even change the course of the village's future. The heroine's presence, her intelligence, and her subtle connection to both people and land set the stage for the events to come. While the village bustled with feasts, wine barrels, and celebrations that masked fear and obedience, a sense of anticipation lingered in the air. The clever young woman, quietly observing, learning, and guiding, represented a spark of hope, a living symbol that perhaps, even under oppressive power, justice, cunning, and courage could find their moment. The whispers of her uncanny intuition were not merely rumors, they were a forewarning of the extraordinary events that would unfold, revealing the heroine as more than a mere servant of the vineyards, but as a force of foresight, balance, and latent power poised to confront injustice when the moment arrived. The village square was transformed into a dazzling spectacle as preparations for the grand feast reached their peak. Long tables were arranged end to end, draped in embroidered cloths that gleamed under the sunlight, and the scent of roasted meats, spiced fruits, and fresh-baked bread wafted through the air. Servants scurried back and forth, balancing trays of glistening wine goblets, plates heaped with delicacies, and ornate decorations meant to impress the ruling elite. Lanterns hung from wooden beams, ready to cast a warm glow as twilight fell, while musicians tuned their instruments, preparing for the enforced entertainment that would accompany the nobles' indulgence. The entire village had been conscripted into service, each villager compelled to participate in the celebration under strict supervision. Every movement was monitored, every smile and bow scrutinized for correctness, and any hint of hesitation or disrespect risked immediate punishment. The grand feast was not merely a display of abundance, it was a calculated demonstration of control, a vivid reminder that the elite's power was absolute, and defiance would be met with swift retribution. The heroine moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her heart steady despite the pressure of the occasion. She had been chosen to serve wine directly to the nobles, a task meant to humiliate her and test her composure. The nobles had intentionally selected her because of her intelligence and perceptive nature, believing that her attempt to maintain dignity under scrutiny would falter, providing them entertainment and a lesson for the rest of the villagers. Her peers watched anxiously, recognizing both the danger she faced and the quiet strength she carried. Though her body was poised and her hands steady, she was acutely aware of the eyes upon her, some filled with suspicion, some with envy, and others with a glimmer of hope that she might navigate this trial with resilience. The selection was no accident, it was an intentional display of dominance, and the stakes could not have been higher. As the feast began, nobles entered with a parade of grandeur, clad in rich silks, adorned with jewelry and carrying themselves with the haughty air of entitlement. Their laughter, loud and often cruel, echoed across the square as they inspected each table and each villager serving them. From their vantage point, they observed the heroine carefully, leaning back in their chairs with amused expressions, fully expecting her to falter. Some whispered jokes at her expense, mocking her attire, her posture, and her quiet demeanor. Their words were sharp, calculated to provoke embarrassment, and carried the weight of authority that had long silenced dissent. Yet beneath the nobles' jeers, there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken acknowledgement that the heroine's intelligence and resourcefulness made her unpredictable, and unpredictability threatened their sense of complete control. Villagers, compelled to dance, entertain, and assist, moved in choreographed sequences designed to display obedience. Children performed timid dances, their small feet shuffling nervously to the rhythm set by musicians, while young adults carried trays of food and wine, bowing constantly to the nobles. The heroine observed these movements, noting the strain and fear etched on her neighbors' faces. She understood the deeper dynamics at play, the nobles' reliance on intimidation, the villagers' learned subservience, and the way appearances of celebration masked oppression. Her awareness sharpened her focus. Every gesture, every glance, every carefully timed step became a tool not just for survival, but for subtly asserting her agency within the confines of the feast. When the moment came to pour the wine, the heroine approached the nobles' table with measured steps, holding a silver pitcher that gleamed in the lantern light. Her hands, though steady, carried the weight of the situation. This was more than serving a drink. It was a trial of her composure, intellect, and courage. The nobles leaned forward with expectant smirks, whispering insults and daring her to falter. They underestimated her, believing that her youth, position, and appearance made her pliable, incapable of resistance. Their mockery was calculated. A slip, a spill, or even a fleeting expression of fear would suffice to reinforce their control and provide amusement at her expense. Yet the heroine moved with deliberate calm, pouring each cup precisely, observing each noble's reaction, and maintaining a composure that defied their expectations. Her wit and inner strength began to surface subtly in her movements and interactions. When a noble sneered or made a sarcastic remark, she responded with measured words or a perfectly timed gesture that revealed confidence without overt defiance. Her awareness of each person's temperament and desires allowed her to navigate the situation skillfully, avoiding provocation while asserting her presence. Villagers who observed her courage felt a flicker of hope, a quiet sense that perhaps fear did not have to dictate every action, and that intelligence and courage could carve out space even under oppressive control. The atmosphere, charged with tension, grew heavier as the feast continued. Nobles laughed and feigned dominance, attempting to unsettle the heroine and remind everyone of their supremacy. Yet her calm, composed demeanor subtly undermined their efforts, creating a tension that was barely perceptible but deeply unsettling to those who had relied on absolute fear to maintain authority. She moved among the goblets and trays with an almost imperceptible grace, every gesture measured, every glance purposeful. Her presence became a silent counterpoint to the nobles' mockery, a demonstration that dignity, courage, and cleverness could endure even under direct scrutiny and intimidation. The feast, intended as a celebration of power and dominance, began to reveal cracks in the nobles' control. While outwardly they maintained appearances of authority, a subtle unease crept into their expressions. Villagers, previously cowed into silence, began to notice the heroine's composure, and some dared to hope that change was possible. Children, who had witnessed the calculated cruelty of the feast, saw in her steadiness a model of resilience and courage. Even the elders, wary from years of oppression, recognized that her intelligence and poise signaled something beyond mere survival, a nascent force capable of challenging injustice when the time was right. By the end of the evening, the grand feast had achieved its ostensible purpose: display, wealth, and spectacle. Yet beneath the gilded exterior, subtle transformations had occurred. The heroine had served with precision, wit, and dignity, resisting humiliation and asserting her presence in ways the nobles could neither fully understand nor immediately counter. Her actions planted seeds of courage and hope within the hearts of the villagers, suggesting that intelligence and resolve could quietly resist tyranny. The nobles, still blinded by arrogance and entitlement, had unwittingly allowed a spark of defiance to persist, and that spark, nurtured by observation, courage, and subtle strength, would grow in the days to come, setting the stage for the extraordinary events that would soon reshape the village entirely. The evening after the grand feast, the heroine walked quietly through the dimly lit village streets, her senses alert to every sound, shadow, and movement. The glow from lanterns cast flickering light on cobblestones, revealing tiny cracks that had gone unnoticed during the daytime celebrations. Her sharp eyes traced patterns in the tiles, noting how some seemed slightly displaced or chipped in ways that could pose a danger if ignored. These imperfections, she realized, might seem trivial to most, but combined with other subtle signs, they hinted at instability, both in the physical structures and in the fragile control the nobles wielded over the village. Her intuition, honed through years of observing the land and people alike, whispered that these small irregularities were not merely accidents but potential harbingers of larger trouble to come. Her footsteps led her to the wine cellars beneath the manor, where the air smelled of fermenting grapes and oak barrels. The dark, cool space, filled with rows of aging casks, had always been a place of both fascination and trepidation. As she moved among the barrels, she overheard a conversation between two servants speaking in hushed tones. "The nobles are planning something," one whispered. "They say the harvest will not be enough to cover debts. They'll punish anyone they think is responsible." The heroine paused, listening intently, sensing not only the fear in the voices but also the underlying threat. The nobles' cruelty extended beyond mere spectacle. They were willing to impose severe consequences on anyone they deemed an obstacle. Each word, each hesitation in tone, confirmed her suspicions that danger lurked not just in overt authority but in secret plots concealed behind laughter, wine, and feigned festivity. Her attention shifted to a stack of barrels, noticing strange markings etched into the wood. Odd symbols and scratches, which might be dismissed as casual wear or accidental damage by the unobservant, drew her immediate scrutiny. They seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic, yet faint enough to escape the casual glance of the nobles or their enforcers. The heroine's intuition suggested these marks were a warning or signal, perhaps left by someone attuned to the same undercurrents of danger she felt. She recognized that these subtle omens could provide insight if interpreted correctly, and that understanding their meaning might give her a crucial advantage in protecting herself and the villagers from the impending threats. Returning to the surface, she moved cautiously through the streets, noting villagers hurrying home or huddled in small groups, speaking in low tones. She quietly approached a few she knew to be trustworthy: the blacksmith who had eyes as sharp as hers, the baker whose quiet courage had shown itself in small acts of kindness, and the elder who had survived decades of the nobles' oppressive rule yet retained wisdom others overlooked. In hushed voices she shared her observations: the cracked tiles, the whispered threats, the strange marks in the wine cellars. Their expressions were a mix of concern, fear, and reluctant agreement. Each understood that danger was looming, but the pervasive fear instilled by the ruling elite made action difficult. They nodded, promising discretion, but none were willing to take direct steps, for the consequences of misjudgment were severe and immediate. Meanwhile, the nobles remained unaware of the heroine's careful observations and quiet warnings. From their lofty positions in the manor and throughout the village, they continued to indulge in their sense of absolute authority. They laughed, drank, and flaunted their dominance, convinced that the villagers were too cowed, too compliant, or too simple to resist their power. Their arrogance blinded them to the growing tension beneath the surface, the subtle signs of dissent, and the quiet intelligence of the heroine who moved unseen among them. They assumed their control was unassailable, that no one could anticipate their schemes or counter their whims, and this overconfidence made them blind to the very dangers that the heroine had begun to perceive. The heroine paused beneath an archway, her eyes tracing the flickering shadows of lantern light over stone walls. She contemplated the unfolding situation, weighing the risks and possibilities. Direct confrontation with the nobles, she understood, would almost certainly result in disaster, harsh punishment, public humiliation, or worse. Instead, she considered ways to turn the situation to her advantage without exposing herself or the villagers to immediate danger. Her mind raced, tracing scenarios in which subtle intervention could shift the balance of power, using cleverness, observation, and timing rather than brute force. Each possibility was measured, each potential move evaluated not only for personal safety but also for the protection of those who trusted her insight. She thought of the wine, the feasts, and the nobles' vanity, their need to appear in control and magnificent before their peers. This weakness, she realized, could be turned into a tool. If she could manipulate appearances, influence perception, and act at the right moment, she might expose their arrogance and cruelty without risking direct confrontation. The subtle signs she had observed, the cracked tiles, the whispers in the cellars, the strange marks, offered opportunities to create situations where the nobles' actions could be turned against them symbolically, revealing their hubris and misdeeds to the villagers. As she moved back toward the village center, the heroine quietly reflected on her responsibility. Fear was pervasive, but courage could be cultivated through observation, intelligence, and careful planning. Her awareness of subtle dangers, combined with her intuition and strategic mind, gave her a unique position from which to act. She knew that one misstep could lead to tragedy, yet inaction would allow cruelty and injustice to persist unchecked. With a measured breath, she resolved to prepare, to wait, and to find the precise moment when the nobles' own indulgence and arrogance could be used against them. Her mind was alive with strategy, every thought shaped by careful observation, foresight, and an unshakable determination to protect the village while maintaining her safety. The hidden warnings she had uncovered, the cracked tiles, the whispered threats, and the subtle omens in the wine cellars, were more than mere signs. They were the first threads in a web of understanding that would allow her to turn the tables. Though most villagers remained paralyzed by fear, she carried a spark of insight and courage that could guide the community through the coming events. In the quiet of the night, beneath the shadows of lanterns and the soft hum of a village preparing for another day, the heroine began to plot her careful, cunning response. A plan that would blend subtlety, intuition, and timing, setting the stage for an extraordinary reversal that no one, not even the arrogant nobles, could anticipate. The day of the nobles' next grand feast arrived with the same dazzling display of wealth and ceremony that had marked previous celebrations. Long tables were set in perfect alignment, laden with glimmering platters of roasted meats, sweet pastries, and bowls overflowing with fresh fruits. Lanterns were hung from wooden beams, casting warm, flickering light across the meticulously decorated hall, while musicians tuned their instruments, ready to provide entertainment for the lords and ladies. Villagers bustled about, carrying trays, arranging dishes, and performing their assigned dances and gestures, all under the watchful gaze of the ruling elite. Every movement was scrutinized. Any misstep could bring humiliation, punishment, or worse. The feast was more than a display of abundance. It was a ritual of control, a vivid reminder that the nobles' power was absolute and that disobedience would be met with swift and often cruel consequences. The heroine had been singled out to serve the wine directly to the nobles, a role designed to humiliate her and assert the lord's dominance. As she stepped forward, silver pitcher in hand, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. Villagers watched in silent terror, understanding both the danger she faced and the quiet strength she carried. Their gazes, filled with hope and apprehension, followed every deliberate step she took. The nobles, seated in their ornate chairs, leaned forward with sly smiles and subtle sneers, fully anticipating her embarrassment or failure. They believed that her youth, position, and measured demeanor made her pliable, incapable of resisting the spectacle of intimidation. The tension in the hall was palpable. Even the musicians hesitated in their playing, sensing the gravity of the moment. As she approached the table, the heroine's internal struggle surged with intensity. Fear pressed at her chest, whispering warnings of humiliation and pain. Anger simmered beneath her skin, a response to the nobles' constant cruelty and their attempts to diminish her dignity. Yet alongside these turbulent emotions, resolve burned steadily, a quiet determination to maintain composure and assert her presence in the face of oppression. She reminded herself that panic or visible weakness would only empower her tormentors, while careful control, patience, and subtle strength could shift the balance in ways the nobles did not anticipate. Each breath she took was measured, grounding her in the moment while connecting her to the intuition and inner strength she had cultivated over years of observation and careful attention. The villagers, though fearful, could not look away. Mothers pressed children close, hoping silently that the young woman could navigate the trial without harm. Older villagers, accustomed to the harsh rule of the elite, watched with a mix of dread and hope, recognizing in her movements a courage they had rarely seen. Though many had long lived under the nobles' dominance, this display of quiet, measured defiance offered a glimmer of possibility. They understood that her actions were not mere survival but a calculated performance, blending skill, wit, and instinct to maintain dignity and control in a situation designed to strip both away. With each step closer to the nobles' table, the heroine subtly channeled her growing power. Not a power of violence, but a force of presence, intelligence, and perceptive awareness that emanated from her connection to the land, the people, and the subtle currents of tension around her. She noticed the smallest shifts in posture, the fleeting expressions of impatience or arrogance, and the micro-gestures that revealed the noble's overconfidence. This awareness became a tool, allowing her to move with purpose and precision, balancing the pitcher carefully, measuring each pour, and maintaining a calm exterior while internally readying herself for the eventual moment of leverage. As the first goblet was filled, the heroine's fingers remained steady despite the quiver of nerves beneath the surface. She observed the nobles' reactions closely. Some sneered, others smirked with an air of superiority, but her composure remained unbroken. Each pour was deliberate, precise, and attentive, signaling to the villagers that she was neither intimidated nor flustered. Even in the face of mockery, she maintained a quiet dignity that unsettled the nobles subtly, though they could not yet comprehend why their usual methods of control were failing. Anger, fear, and resolve intermingled within her, creating a tension that sharpened her instincts rather than hindering them. She allowed the nobles to believe they controlled the situation, all the while observing, calculating, and channeling her inner power. Her mind catalogued each detail: the nobles' positions, their moods, the reactions of the villagers, the layout of the room, all of which would become crucial in navigating future challenges. Her strength was not in confrontation but in perception, patience, and the ability to act with precision when the moment demanded it. The villagers' emotions were equally complex. Some were terrified for her safety, imagining the harsh punishments that could result from even a minor slip. Others, however, felt a spark of inspiration, seeing in her composure a model of courage and intelligence that might guide them in resisting oppression more subtly and effectively. Mothers whispered prayers under their breath, children watched wide-eyed, and elders silently encouraged her perseverance, recognizing that her ability to maintain dignity under pressure represented a potential shift in the village's power dynamic. By the time she had served several nobles, a subtle change in the atmosphere began to take shape. While the elites continued their mocking, there was a faint uncertainty in their expressions, a hesitation that had not been there before. Her calm, deliberate actions and steady presence introduced an element of unpredictability into their accustomed control. Though they could not yet articulate it, the nobles sensed that their dominance was being subtly challenged, not with open defiance, but with intelligence, awareness, and quiet resilience. In this tense moment, the heroine's inner strength reached full clarity. Fear remained, but it was tempered by resolve. Anger simmered, yet it was directed into precise awareness rather than rash action. She moved as though guided by instinct, intuition, and a growing sense of connection to forces beyond the immediate scene. Her presence radiated calm authority, suggesting that though the nobles commanded wealth and status, there existed a power within the village, embodied in her courage, intelligence, and foresight, that could not be suppressed. The combination of these qualities, subtly displayed while performing the nobles' bidding, set the stage for the extraordinary events that were soon to follow, foreshadowing a reversal of control that no one in the hall could yet imagine. The hall was heavy with anticipation as the heroine approached the nobles' table, the silver pitcher in her hands gleaming under the lantern light. The murmurs of the villagers behind her were barely audible, hushed by fear, yet filled with a silent hope that the young woman might navigate the trial unscathed. The nobles, sensing an opportunity for amusement, leaned forward with smirks and veiled threats, expecting her to falter, spill the wine, or betray a trace of nervousness. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, yet she moved with deliberate calm, stepping close to the nearest goblet and preparing to pour the crimson liquid that had symbolized indulgence, dominance, and control throughout the feast. As she lifted the pitcher, a subtle shift seemed to ripple through the air. It began imperceptibly at first, a faint vibration, a barely audible hum, a sensation that the world itself was attentive to the moment. Her hands remained steady, her posture unwavering, but beneath the surface, a force seemed to stir, responding to the combination of fear, injustice, and resolve that radiated from her. The villagers did not yet notice the change, too focused on the tension of the scene, but the nobles, arrogantly confident in their dominance, failed to perceive that the ritual of control was about to be disrupted in a manner beyond their understanding. The moment the wine touched the surface of the first goblet, the transformation began. A deep, rich red that had promised pleasure and indulgence darkened unnaturally, shifting in hue until it mirrored the dark, glistening color of fresh blood. The liquid seemed to thrum with a life of its own, pulsing slightly as if reacting to the intent and presence of the heroine. The nobles recoiled, their eyes widening in shock and confusion. Some instinctively leaned back, their hands trembling, while others stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend how their carefully controlled feast had been so profoundly disrupted. The villagers gasped quietly, their fear mingling with awe, recognizing that the young woman's composure remained intact even as the impossible unfolded before them. The heroine's calm was deliberate. She understood the symbolism of the moment. The wine, once a tool of indulgence and oppression, had been transformed into a mirror reflecting the corruption, cruelty, and moral decay of the nobles themselves. She did not panic or flinch, though every nerve in her body was alive with the awareness of the spectators' fear and anticipation. Her resolve emanated in subtle waves, touching the villagers and unsettling the elite in equal measure. Though the nobles tried to dismiss what they saw as a trick of light or a fleeting illusion, the vivid color, the subtle movement of the liquid, and the unmistakable sense of moral weight in the air rendered such explanations implausible. The effect was immediate and profound. The nobles' previously confident postures shifted to tension and fear, their eyes darting around the hall as though seeking escape or a rational explanation for what had occurred. Their arrogance, long cultivated and reinforced by years of unquestioned dominance, faltered in the face of an inexplicable phenomenon that they could neither command nor understand. They were confronted not by a human adversary in the usual sense but by a force that reflected the consequences of their own cruelty, a symbolic reckoning that seemed to emanate from the heroine herself, though the villagers sensed that it was as much the land, the air, and the collective moral weight of injustice responding as it was her personal power. Villagers, still frozen in part by fear, began to whisper among themselves, recognizing the extraordinary nature of the moment. Mothers clutched their children, elders pressed their hands together, and younger villagers leaned forward, their eyes wide with the realization that the heroine's calm and deliberate presence had wrought a transformation that no one could have anticipated. The blood-red wine was no longer simply a liquid to be consumed or served. It had become a living testament, a visible and undeniable statement that cruelty, corruption, and the abuse of power carry consequences that even the arrogant cannot escape. As she poured additional goblets, the effect repeated, each cup reflecting the same unnatural hue and pulsating with the same ominous vitality. The nobles, once unified in their contempt and amusement, now found themselves isolated in fear, unable to communicate or act decisively without betraying the vulnerability that the phenomenon exposed. Their whispers of doubt grew louder, uncertainty creeping into the corners of the hall. For the first time, the villagers glimpsed a shift in the power dynamic, not through violence but through revelation and symbolic justice. The heroine's calm, measured presence contrasted starkly with the noble's flustered reaction, magnifying the impact of the transformation in ways words alone could not convey. The heroine's inner strength, cultivated through years of observation, subtle defiance and intuition, allowed her to maintain composure as the noble's panic grew. She had anticipated the psychological effect of the transformation, knowing that fear and confusion would undermine their control even more effectively than physical confrontation. Her mind remained clear, calculating each step while observing the reactions of both nobles and villagers. Each pulse of the blood-red liquid was a silent message. Arrogance and cruelty are never beyond consequence, and those who exploit others will eventually face a reckoning, whether immediate or inevitable. Though the nobles tried to regain their composure, their efforts were futile. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by nervous glances, strained smiles, and whispered exchanges of disbelief. The symbolic power of the transformed cups had done more than shock them. It had unsettled the entire hierarchy of control, revealing the limits of dominance built solely on fear and spectacle. Villagers watched with growing awareness that this was not mere accident or chance, but a deliberate assertion of agency, perception, and moral clarity. In the midst of the hall, the heroine stood poised, a calm figure surrounded by astonishment and tension. Her eyes met those of the nobles with quiet certainty, her resolve clear and unwavering. The symbolic act of the wine transforming into blood foreshadowed the consequences that awaited the arrogant, a visual and visceral reminder that cruelty cannot persist unchallenged. She did not raise her voice, nor did she make overt threats, yet the statement was undeniable. Justice, even in subtle or mystical forms, had begun to act. The transformation of the wine into blood marked a turning point, a moment when the heroine's insight, courage, and connection to the moral and mystical forces around her became undeniable. The nobles' shock and fear were only the beginning. The villagers, quietly inspired, began to understand that change was possible, that courage and intelligence could confront oppression without reckless defiance, and that the consequences of arrogance and cruelty, though sometimes slow to manifest, are inevitable. The hall, filled with flickering lantern light, hushed murmurs, and the unnerving red glow of the transformed wine, became the stage for a subtle but profound reckoning, one that would echo in the village for generations to come. The nobles sat frozen, their hands hovering over the goblets as they stared at the blood-red liquid, their faces pale beneath the golden glow of lanterns. A deep unease settled over them, replacing the confident air they had worn like a second skin. The unexpected transformation of wine into blood was not a simple trick or accident. It was something far greater, something that reflected not just a momentary lapse of control but the deeper weight of their own cruelty. Each pulse of red liquid seemed to mirror their misdeeds, the oppression, the mockery, the exploitation of those who had no power to resist. The realization dawned slowly like a creeping shadow, that their dominance, built over years of intimidation, was not as unassailable as they had believed. Fear, the tool they had wielded so easily against villagers, now turned inward, gnawing at their confidence and shaking the foundation of their authority. The heroine remained composed, her eyes steady and calm as they swept across the stunned nobles. She felt the resonance of the event not as an external spectacle, but as an affirmation of her own connection to justice, intuition, and something ineffable that seemed to hum through the room. The wine's transformation had not occurred randomly. It had responded to the moral imbalance in the hall, to the cruelty that had been masked as tradition, and to her own determination to navigate oppression with awareness and clarity. She sensed a power that extended beyond her immediate self, a force that intertwined with perception, consequence, and perhaps even mystical currents that had long been whispered about in hushed tones among villagers. This recognition brought a clarity of purpose. She was no longer merely a participant in the feast, a target of humiliation, or a servant in a game of control. She had become a conduit for justice, subtle yet undeniable, and the nobles could no longer ignore her presence or the implications of the moment. Villagers, previously silent and fearful, began to murmur among themselves, their eyes widening as they watched the unfolding scene. The heroine's calm, measured demeanor amidst the nobles' panic sparked a collective awakening. Courage and intelligence could endure where brute force and intimidation had long dominated. Mothers nudged children closer, elders exchanged glances, and young adults whispered softly to one another, recognizing that fear and cruelty were not absolute, and that there existed a power, visible in the heroine's poise, that could challenge oppression without direct confrontation. For the first time, the villagers saw the potential for change, a subtle yet potent shift in the balance of power within the hall and, by extension, the village itself. The nobles, still reeling, attempted to rationalize what had occurred. Some whispered nervously to each other, suggesting trickery, manipulation, or some rare chemical anomaly in the wine, but each explanation faltered under the undeniable reality before them. The red liquid, so vividly and unnaturally transformed, defied logic and mockery alike. Even those nobles who prided themselves on reason and control could not fully articulate the force at work. The reflection of their own misdeeds in the wine's crimson hue was inescapable, a visual indictment that left them silent and vulnerable. They realized that their arrogance had blinded them not only to the heroine's potential but also to the consequences of cruelty itself, consequences that could manifest in ways they could neither anticipate nor control. The heroine's understanding of her own power deepened with every passing moment. She recognized that her connection to justice was not merely personal or moral, but entwined with intuition and a mysterious, almost elemental force that seemed to respond to imbalance and wrongdoing. Her senses, sharpened by observation and awareness, allowed her to perceive the subtle currents of tension, fear, and expectation in the hall. She understood that while the nobles wielded authority through spectacle, wealth, and intimidation, she possessed a different kind of influence, one grounded in insight, foresight, and the ability to act decisively at the right moment. This power was not about brute force but about balance, perception, and the capacity to catalyze change when conditions aligned. As the minutes passed, the nobles' panic began to ripple outward. Their whispered comments grew louder, their attempts at composure increasingly awkward. They gestured to each other uncertainly, their authoritative stances faltering as the symbolic weight of the blood-red wine made itself undeniable. Each glance they exchanged carried the weight of the realization. Their cruelty had manifested consequences beyond their control, and the heroine, the young woman they had underestimated, had become the visible and unshakable focal point of that reckoning. Fear had returned to them, not as a tool they could manipulate, but as a reflection of the imbalance they had created and could no longer contain. The villagers' perception of the heroine underwent a profound transformation. Where once she had been a quiet observer, capable and intelligent but subject to the noble's whim, she now appeared as a figure of resilience and authority. The subtle mastery she had displayed, her calm control in the face of intimidation, and the unmistakable transformation of the wine into blood marked her as more than human in the eyes of many, someone attuned to forces beyond ordinary perception, someone capable of defending justice and exacting symbolic retribution. Whispers of awe and cautious admiration spread among the villagers, as they began to understand that courage, intelligence, and perception could shape events in ways that brute force never could. The heroine's mind, alert and deliberate, began to plan her next moves. She understood that while the nobles had been shaken, they were still dangerous, still capable of retaliation if provoked recklessly. Her approach would require cunning, patience, and the careful balance of restraint and decisive action. She weighed every potential outcome, considered the reactions of both nobles and villagers, and formulated strategies that relied on insight rather than open conflict. Her power was undeniable, yet it was most effective when wielded subtly, through perception, timing, and the ability to reveal the truths the nobles most desperately wished to hide. By the end of the evening, the hall was charged with a new, unspoken energy. The nobles, subdued and uncertain, were no longer untouchable symbols of dominance. The villagers, previously cowed and fearful, had glimpsed the possibility of change. The heroine stood at the center of this transformation, poised, resolute, and deeply aware of her connection to justice, intuition, and the subtle currents that shaped human behavior and consequence. She had become a force of balance and reckoning, capable of turning fear into understanding, oppression into insight, and cruelty into revelation. In this moment, the realization of her power was complete. She was no longer merely a participant in the nobles' game of control. She was an agent of consequence, insight, and subtle justice. The villagers saw her as a symbol of resilience, a guide for courage and perception, and the nobles understood, whether consciously or instinctively, that their cruelty and arrogance could no longer be exercised without response. With cunning, restraint, and unwavering resolve, the heroine prepared to act decisively, aware that the unfolding events had set the stage for a The nobles, still pale and shaken from the earlier events, began to feel the first tangible consequences of their arrogance. The hall, once a stage of their dominance and indulgence, now seemed charged with judgment, as if the walls themselves bore witness to their misdeeds. Whispers spread among the villagers, low at first, then steadily growing louder, recounting the earlier spectacle. The wine transformed into blood, a vivid symbol of the cruelty and oppression the nobles had inflicted for so long. The nobles' faces tightened with unease as they realized that their authority, once absolute, had been publicly challenged in a way they could neither dismiss nor reverse. Some of the nobles attempted to maintain appearances, standing straighter, forcing smiles and issuing weak threats. Yet the villagers, their eyes bright with newfound awareness, were no longer cowed. They watched carefully, some exchanging subtle gestures of solidarity, some speaking quietly to one another in a tone that suggested courage was beginning to take root. Each hesitant step the nobles took to reclaim composure only emphasized their vulnerability. The weight of their past cruelty, previously hidden or ignored, now pressed visibly upon them. The symbolic blood in the cups served as a constant reminder, not merely of the heroine's power, but of the inescapable reflection of their own actions. The heroine, poised and steady, did not need to confront the nobles directly. Her authority radiated from her presence, her calm control, and the knowledge that she had been the instrument through which justice had been revealed. She moved with measured confidence, allowing the nobles' discomfort to unfold naturally, subtly guiding the villagers' attention to the imbalance of power without raising her voice. Her eyes met those of certain nobles, unflinching, conveying an unspoken message: the days of unchecked cruelty were over. Even as she refrained from overt punishment, the aura of her presence alone signaled that accountability had arrived. Social humiliation became an immediate consequence. The nobles' once proud gestures of dominance now seemed awkward and forced. Their laughter, once sharp and condescending, faltered. Servants and attendants, emboldened by the heroine's example, began to treat them with subtle resistance, hesitating to obey arbitrary orders or mocking them in ways small enough to be plausible deniability but large enough to erode their self-assurance. Guests from nearby settlements, if present, would have witnessed the nobles' unsteadiness and the heroine's composure, further amplifying the social repercussions and ensuring that the elite's reputation would be quietly but irreversibly tarnished. Mystical retribution, though subtle, was felt in the hall and beyond. The very air seemed charged with the heroine's calm authority and the weight of justice. Some of the nobles reported odd sensations: brief chills, a sense of imbalance under their feet, or the faint hum of the hall as though it itself had taken part in the reckoning. While they struggled to rationalize these experiences, the villagers understood them instinctively. The land, the hall, and the heroine had conspired in subtle harmony to ensure that cruelty could not persist unchallenged. Even those who had previously remained fearful or obedient sensed that the world itself had shifted in favor of justice, guided by the heroine's presence. Villagers, emboldened by the spectacle, began reclaiming small acts of dignity. A servant who had long suffered under demeaning orders straightened her posture and completed her duties with quiet pride. Young workers, previously fearful of speaking out, whispered counsel to one another about fairness in labor. Elders, who had remained silent witnesses for years, now spoke softly, offering guidance and moral support. Each act, while small, symbolized the awakening of collective agency, the realization that courage could ripple outward, and that the heroine's example was more than personal, it was communal, a lesson etched in memory and behavior alike. The symbolic blood in the cups lingered in memory, a vivid, almost sacred lesson. Even after the feast had ended and the hall returned to routine appearances, villagers spoke quietly among themselves of what had transpired. Mothers recounted the story to children, emphasizing the necessity of courage and moral awareness. The heroine's calm defiance and the miraculous transformation of wine into blood became a parable, a cautionary tale for both the powerful and the powerless. Cruelty carries consequences, arrogance blinds, and insight, courage, and justice can manifest in subtle yet profound ways. The heroine continued to exert her influence with subtlety and precision. She encouraged the villagers to reclaim not only their dignity but also their understanding of justice and fairness. She guided them in small acts that reinforced communal strength, patience, and ethical integrity. The nobles, now humbled and wary, found themselves watched closely at all times, unable to command the same obedience they had once enjoyed. The balance of power had shifted not through violence alone, but through the revelation of moral and mystical consequence, the heroine's quiet authority, and the awakening of collective awareness. The villagers learned that courage need not be loud or reckless. The heroine's example demonstrated that awareness, strategy, and composure could challenge oppression just as effectively as direct confrontation. Through her guidance, the community began to understand that collective action, tempered by intelligence and moral clarity, could restore balance and dignity, ensuring that injustice could not persist unchecked. They saw that the actions of one individual, aligned with insight, principle, and determination, could spark transformation across an entire community. By the close of the feast, the nobles had been thoroughly humbled. Their threats had no teeth, their authority had been questioned, and their arrogance was tempered by both mystical and social recognition of their misdeeds. The villagers, inspired by the heroine's courage and the symbolic power of the blood in the cups, began to assert themselves gently but decisively, reclaiming space, voice, and dignity. The symbolic lesson, etched in memory and reinforced through observation, ensured that the reckoning would endure beyond the walls of the hall and into the broader life of the village. The heroine, calm and resolute, watched quietly as the villagers reclaimed small measures of agency. She had guided the moment with wisdom and foresight, ensuring that the nobles faced the consequences of their cruelty while teaching the community the value of courage, discernment, and collective action. The blood in the cups, both literal in its immediate appearance and symbolic in its enduring meaning, would remain a testament to the moment when justice, subtle yet undeniable, was served, marking the beginning of a new balance in the village and a lasting reminder of the power of insight, courage, and moral reckoning.